So I've already kind of looked at the two commands that are useful for showing changes. We've looked at get log, and we've looked at get diff. But now we want to look at these in a little more detail. So get log, remember, shows a list of all the commits we've made with those messages. So if we press enter, notice that this just barely fits on one line, so it doesn't go with the less pager. And the last time we saw this, there was only one commit. Now there's 4 commits, and we can look at each of these messages in a little more detail. So let's look at this first one. It's really broken down into a couple parts. The first is this commit, and then ridiculous series of characters. This is called the commit hash, and this is essentially a unique identifier for this particular commit. We'll use these in a second to actually identify specific commits. And we'll see that we don't actually have to use the entire thing to identify the commit. Usually, the first 4 to 6 characters are sufficient to uniquely identify this commit. Because, if you'll notice, there's no other commit that starts with even C. So in theory, C would be enough to identify this. But it's usually good to just go ahead and use the first 6 or so characters. The next 2 lines show you the author, so in this case me, with my email, and when the commit was made. Gives you the date and time, and then UTC offset is -8 hours. And you can see here that it has our whole commit message. And this is why it's really nice to include a little bit of a summary of each file changed, so that if you're looking for a specific commit where, say, we added the 2 time periods files, you can find it really easily. Or we needed to know, all right, where do we add Alabama? Oh, it's probably this one, right? So that's why I really like this format for commit messages. And then, of course, having the summary is useful enough in this view, but there's another piece, or another way that we could use get log if we started getting more and more commits. So like right now this isn't too bad, but let's say that we had hundreds of commits. I have a repository that has 850 some commits right now. If I wanted to look for one particular commit that's a ways back, that's going to be a pain in the butt. We can shorten this a little bit using the get log command with the pretty option set to 1 line. Notice that now it's shrunk down so that it gives us the commit hash and that first line. This is why writing that first line to be a nice summary is really helpful, because it lets you find or zero in on the commit that you're interested in when using log in this form really easily. So that's the basic use of get log. It has a lot of advanced options that we'll get to later, but these are more than enough for basic tracking of your code. Now let's go back to the diff command. If we just run it right now, it doesn't show us anything. Why is that? Well, by default, remember, this shows us the difference between the last commit and the working directory. But it can do much more than that. In fact, it can show us the difference between any 2 arbitrary commits. And you do this with the syntax get diff commit 1 commit 2. And there's a couple different ways that we can identify a commit, but the most straightforward one is just to use the first 6 or so characters of the commit hash. So for instance, if we wanted to see the changes that occurred between this one where we edited US dates and this one that we just made, we would do get diff 111, it's probably enough actually, and C47. So the first few characters of this one and the first few characters of this one. If we do enter, okay, that wasn't enough. So go ahead and do a little bit more. 868, C4750, 750. There we go. And notice, so let's actually take a look at what this is showing us. This is showing us the changes that we made to the time periods day of week and time periods months files. Remember, we moved Sunday to the end of the days of the week, and we shortened 4 of the months given. But remember, we'd done this before all at once, and then committed US states, and then committed these changes. So this is just refreshing, or reinforcing, I guess, the fact that you don't have to commit all of your changes at once. We made all these changes at the same time. We made all of these changes before we even made this commit. But because we didn't add these changes until this commit, they only show up between this one and this one. So we're not limited to just looking at adjacent commits. We could actually look at changes spanning multiple commits. So let's go ahead and look at all of the changes since our first commit. So we could do git diff 4047df to C47750 and look at how the changes are shown. So since we'd already added US states in that first commit, it shows us the changes we've made since then, adding Alabama and deleting Indiana. But for the other ones, since they were not added in the first commit, the commit that we use as the basis for this diff, it shows the abbreviated forms of the months as simply being added, and it shows Sunday as starting off at the end. So keep in mind that when you go over multiple commits, it shows the sum of the differences. It doesn't break them down step by step. Again, just like before, if we wanted to only see changes to one particular file, say US states, we could. So just by adding the file name after this, we can see that the sum of the changes between the very first commit and the most recent commit was just the addition of Alabama and the removal of Indiana. Now sometimes you will see the format like this, where 2 dashes are used to separate the file names from the rest of the inputs. This just helps avoid any ambiguity if, say, a file name matches a branch or a tag in Git, which we'll talk about later. This forces Git to recognize, or these 2 dashes force Git to recognize that all of the following arguments are in fact file names. Now, of course, typing out the commit hashes gets annoying sometimes. So, speaking of the commit hashes, you can see, I think if we look, nope, sorry. So notice that these numbers do not match up with the commit hashes. That's just something to be aware of, that this line does not reflect the commit hashes. The most important thing, again, to look for here is the file name that you're looking at. Now, as I was saying, sometimes it gets really annoying to have to type out the commit hashes, especially if you know, relative to your current location, which commits you want to look at. So say we wanted to look at the difference between the commit 2 commits ago and the most recent commit. We could do that using a shortcut, which is head tilde and then the number back. So in Git, the term head refers to the most recent commit on your current branch. Since we only have one branch, this is fairly intuitive. It's the most recent commit. And the tilde1 extension means the commit one before head. So if we do this, we will see our changes to the time periods files again. If we wanted to see the difference between the commit before that and the last commit, we could do head tilde 2. And now the changes to all three files show up. You could also do a diff between an arbitrary commit in your working directory. So let's go ahead and edit US states one more time. And let's add Alaska. So if we just do git diff, it will just show us that we've added Alaska. But if we do git diff head tilde 1, it shows us that we have moved Sunday, abbreviated 4 months, and added Alaska. This is the difference between the commit one before the most recent one to our working directory. So anytime you do git diff with only a single commit given, the second commit is assumed to be the working directory. So git diff head is no different than just git diff, because if you give it no arguments, it assumes you want the difference between the most recent commit and the working directory, because that's the most useful one.